Xanue, Befriending the Bigfoot Forest People. Written by psychologist Dr. Matthew A. Johnson. I'm Willie Rose, and we're reading book 2 of, well, who knows how many books, because he's got number 3 getting ready to go at this point in time. We'll start with the memoirs from Zorth's daughter-in-law, and then go into chapter 1. I met Zorth on my first trip to the Southern Oregon Interaction Area, SOIA, in early June of 2016. Matt and I had spent the afternoon exploring the area. Matt showed me around and oriented me to everything before nightfall. Not long after we settled in for our night sit, I walked forward to the tree line, facing into a cove of open ground surrounded by trees. Between the tree canopy and the lack of moon, it was extremely dark and very still. I began playing my flute and almost immediately became aware of a huge, shimmering figure to my left, standing at the edge of the trees. Matt verified that he also saw the figure and identified him as Zorth. I turned to face Zorth and walked a few steps closer, stopping about 8 feet from the figure. I could not only see the shimmering shape, I could also feel a palpable sense of presence and energy. I greeted Zorth as calmly as I could, in spite of my pounding heart. I was not afraid, but I was in awe and ecstatic to be standing so close to Zorth. Matt told me Zorth was enjoying my music, and would I please resume my playing. I did so, and as I played, Zorth slowly faded back into the trees. We were still working toward the Exodus at that time, totally unaware that later in this same month, Matt, Mike, and Steve would help the Xanue achieve their goal and rescue the remnants of their people stranded on their dying home world. I also didn't know that Zorth would eventually adopt Matt, making him my father-in-law when Matt and I married. At the time, Matt was living in Southern Oregon, and he came to visit me after the Exodus. He was still jazzed with all of the energy that filled the SOIA area the night of the Exodus and still processing all that had happened. We went into the Greenbelt one of those nights, and though I was unable to see the figures that surrounded us, Matt described how they were coming by and thanking us for our efforts and sharing their joy in having their friends and family safe and reunited at last. During one of our trips to the woods, we went through my favorite grove of cedar trees. There was one tree in particular that always pulled me to it, feeling a warmth through the bark against my palms. On that day, as I pressed my hands against the tree, I felt a brush of consciousness and a sense of love like I have never experienced before. It was a fleeting experience. Although I returned to that tree many times after that, I never again felt that presence or that loving warmth again. Matt had often spoken of writing a book to share his experiences and teach what he had learned. After the Exodus was completed, Zorth spoke to Matt and told him the time had come to write his book. We talked about the book when Matt was visiting one weekend. When Matt left to return to Oregon, he headed out via Yakima, Washington. Bob Gimlin had agreed to write the foreword for Matt's book. Therefore, Matt was meeting Bob and Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Jones, retired U.S. Army, to tell them the story of the Exodus so Bob would know exactly what he was putting his name on. Matt called me after he left the restaurant, excited about Bob's response and acceptance of his story, and ecstatic that Bob had agreed to write a foreword for the book. The following couple of months were chaotic. Matt was writing quickly, the story flowing through and out of him. At times he reported that it felt like he had help in the writing of the book as ideas and words took shape so quickly in his mind. We were in a rush to get the book published in time for the third annual Bigfoot University Conference in Bremerton, Washington, in April of 2017. Matt would send out sections of the book as he finished them to me and several other people to edit as he finished. Matt was also busy talking to people about contributing testimonials and relating their experiences to add to the corroboration of the events in the book. Additionally, Matt was talking to the individuals being invited to speak at the conference. He told the story of the Exodus over and over, explaining to people writing for the book and planning on speaking so that they would understand the magnitude of the message that Matt would be sharing. Matt finally finished his book and sent it off to the publishers. Pre-orders were already flowing steadily in. I had labels printed and stocks of shipping envelopes on hand. I thought I was organized until the books arrived at the house. Matt was still living in Southern Oregon at the time, so all of the packaging and shipping of the books fell on me. I had boxes of addressed and packaged books on every available inch of the floor space in the house, with only a narrow walkway left. After initially trying to take small loads of books into the post office each night on my way home from work, my sanity was saved when I stopped into a small local independent shipping and copy center. I gave them all my information and delivered my boxes of books to them. When they had quiet times during the day, they processed and shipped out all the books. As more orders came in, I would deliver more books to them. They continued shipping them for me through all of the entire processing of the pre-orders and the initial flood of orders once the book was published. The spring 2017 Bigfoot University Conference was scheduled for the last weekend of April as usual. After work each night, I would update the attendance list, load names for name tags, and make lists of people who had ordered the book to be delivered at the conference. Then I received a phone call from one of my older brothers. My father, dependent on a walker after breaking both hips in falls, had been struck in the back of the head by a very heavy, old-fashioned garage door and had been badly concussed. Dad was in the hospital and they were still assessing the extent of his injuries. I headed to Salem, Oregon that weekend. I was able to spend a couple of days with my father in the rehabilitation center. He was unstuck in time, drifting through events of his life. He wanted his briefcase and drawings for a meeting with customers after being retired for over 20 years. He explained to my brother and I the importance of the positioning of the antennas on the tower. He needed his briefcase to make certain that the drawings of the towers correctly showed the locations of the antennas. He kept saying over and over again that he didn't know what to do, but could not explain what he meant. Yet when staff came into his room, he would sit up and coherently and correctly introduce us to them. My sister-in-law brought my mother to visit every day, and we all spent the hours we could together. 2 weeks later, my brother made arrangements to move my father back home on hospice care. The rehabilitation center staff were confused by his request. They were confident my father could and would recover. I don't know exactly what my brother saw or sensed, but his instincts were right. My father returned home on Wednesday morning. He never spoke again after he was loaded into the van that returned him to my mother, the home that they had lived in together for 50 years. 2 days later, he slipped quietly away as my mother held his hand. Friends pitched in over the next 2 weeks to help me finalize all of the arrangements for the conference in Bremerton. I handed over all of the registration sheets, book orders and books, meal tickets and lanyards to a group of friends and started my drive south for the funeral of my father. I was still north of Portland when Matt called me in tears to ask if I remembered when I had seen Zeus last and to inform me he was missing. At that point, I became totally numb, overwhelmed, and unable to help in any way. Matt called back around half an hour later to let me know that Zeus had been found, cold, unresponsive, but alive. They were taking him with them to Bremerton, and many people were taking turns holding Zeus and keeping him warm. My family spent all day Friday together at the house with my mother. She was quiet, fragile, and achingly bereft. She and my father were high school sweethearts and had been married in 1945. After 71 years together, a part of her had been torn abruptly from her. The only comfort we could provide was by being there, a testament to their life and the family they built and nurtured together. 6 children, in-laws, and grandchildren, all grieving together in their own way. My parents had been active and involved members of the community throughout their lives living in Salem. The church I had grown up in, connected to the elementary school I attended, was packed even though it is a huge facility. I saw many familiar faces as we walked down the center aisle to the pews reserved for family in the front of the church. My eldest daughter had accompanied me to Salem and was a rock and a comfort as we all said our final goodbyes to our father and grandfather. The service was a blur, as was the following reception. My only vivid memory was the presence of a friend from elementary school I had not seen in years. She was there for me to try to provide solace and comfort in any way she could. I was incredibly touched by her taking that time to be there for me after all of those years apart. After the reception, I changed clothes, climbed in my car, and began the long drive north from Salem, Oregon to Bremerton, Washington. My goal was to get there before Matt began his presentation. I knew what he was to present would not be palatable to everyone, something he was keenly aware of. He was putting everything on the line to speak the truth of a journey that had taken us in unimaginable directions. We had had time to process the implications and impacts of what Matt had learned from Zorth, but now he was going to deliver all of the information at once to a group of people who had no idea of the magnitude of the events they were about to experience through his story. I arrived during the dinner break, just in time to get oriented before Matt began to speak. There was a tremendous outpouring of condolences and support from everyone I met who knew I had spent the morning at my father's funeral. However, there was also a palpable tension in the room, and Matt's level of stress was evident to everyone around us. One woman told me that she and some friends had taken to hanging out in the bathroom because the level of energy was so intense. Another one of the speakers from earlier in the day, looked seriously shaken up. I tried to thank her for helping to care for Zeus, but she was miles away when she responded, and her eyes showed confusion and hesitation before Matt even began to speak. Then the hour arrived, and Matt took the microphone. The only thing I could do was be there for him, stand with him, and stand with the truth. I sat on the stage behind him as he began to present a silent testimony of support and love that I hoped he was aware of. The fallout after the conference was about what we expected. There were those who were unable and some perhaps unwilling to accept what Matt experienced as real. The truth regarding the nature of the entities previously known as Bigfoot was more than some could or would absorb. However, there were also those who embraced the knowledge, supported the message, and by doing so, encouraged us. We were unsure of what would come next. Matt moved back to Puyallup, Washington from Grants Pass, Oregon. We decided it was time to move south of the Olympia area into the country to a quieter environment. Beyond that, we didn't know what our lives would hold. We put the Puyallup house on the market, and I expected it to sell quickly. I loved the house and the setting, and we had put a lot of work in the yard since we moved in. We went house hunting south of the Olympia area. Late in the afternoon, at the southernmost house we had found to view, we found the Chehalis house where we now live. It was a perfect setting, snuggled in the woods in the countryside west of the small town Chehalis, Washington. The house was beautifully finished. It was the dream house of the people who had built it slowly around them. We made an offer that day contingent on the sale of our house. Time passed and our house didn't sell. I was frustrated and stressed. People told me if I buried a statue of St. Joseph upside down in the backyard, the house would sell. It turned out that was a very real superstition. There were many St. Joseph statues available online with instructions on how to bury them in the yard. As our offer got close to expiring, I bought one and buried it in the flower bed outside the sliding glass door. The house still didn't sell. Our offer expired. I gave up, deciding that there must be a purpose in our remaining in Puyallup, Washington. Matt and I discussed the situation and decided to let the listing lapse and try again in the spring. I had been blocking open a window for the cats to use as a pet door. However, we worried about the dog trying to jump from the window and hurting himself. So, after I gave up and turned the eventual sale of our home over to God, I went to the pet store and brought home a pet door we could install in the sliding glass door. It took me most of an afternoon, but I finished the installation and the cats took to it immediately. Shortly thereafter, we got an offer on the house. We renewed our offer on the Chehalis home, and it was accepted. Suddenly, we were packing and boxing and preparing to move. Apparently, letting go and trusting God really does work. In October of 2017, Friday the 13th to be exact, we spent our first night in the new house, sleeping on foam pads and sleeping bags on the floor. We could hear the frogs in the wetlands and an occasional call of a barred owl. I lay awake for a while, cataloging the sounds of the new house and the surroundings. The stars were brilliant, visible through the skylights in the ceiling above. The next day, the movers arrived with our belongings, and suddenly the house was filling with familiar furniture. The house was really ours. Unfortunately, I did not think to log the events that occurred after we moved in. I can't promise that these events occurred in the order in which I described them, but I will try to keep a somewhat chronological sequence. 2 weekends after we moved in, Matt left to spend a weekend with Grady in Grants Pass, Oregon. I was still unpacking boxes and slowly organizing the house. I still shudder when I see packing boxes and wrapping paper. I was in the living room during the afternoon when I heard voices. Clearly, 2 individuals were talking to each other. It sounded like they were in the guest bedroom right off the entryway to the house. I walked into the entryway and glanced into the bedroom. It was empty. I walked out to the front porch. There was no one in the driveway or on the road above the house. I smiled as I turned back to go into the house and called out, "Hello!" That wasn't the first time that Xanue had let me know they were around while Matt was out of town. We had an open house in January of 2019 for our big-footing friends. We actually got a break in the weather, and we were able to invite people to see our new home and sleep out on the property. Given the time of year, we had an excellent turnout. We had several groups spread out over the property doing night sits. Matt, Steve Bachman, and I worked our way from group to group, visiting with them and hearing about their experiences. Almost every group was hearing movement, seeing orbs and lights and flickers of energy. One group, deep under the canopy of the trees at the bottom of the hill, was not so fortunate. It was so dark where they were sitting that they were unable to see anything. About 100 yards away, the group along the wetlands were having an amazing experience. When I caught up with them, they told me the trees on the far side of the wetlands were filled with lights on the tops of the trees, and larger orbs had been seen closer. I turned around to talk to one of the people there and saw 2 pale blue orbs about the size of a dodgeball floating behind us. All I could say was, "Wow," which made everyone laugh. In the spring of 2018, Grady came up north and spent some time with us during his spring break. We brought a friend of his down from Puyallup for company. We had put up trail cameras on the property to identify what wildlife we had hanging around. When we later watched the still shots from the camera at the top of the hill, we captured Grady and his friend running up the hill on the trail from the woods. Stepping through the pictures, we could also see a distortion in a vaguely humanoid form moving directly behind the boys. Matt left to take Grady back home, and I started work planting flowers in the planter boxes along the hill. Matt had cleaned them all out for me, so all I had to do was add dirt and work in the flowers. When I got to the first of the large round planter boxes, I discovered a circle of rocks carefully laid out in the planter. In the center of the circle of rocks was a bone. Most of the rocks were similar to the ones on the ground around the house, but one of the stones was a pale bluish white with round darker blue spots. I took a picture of the arrangement and sent it to Matt. I asked him if he or Grady had left the rocks in the planter. I knew the answer, but I had to be certain. Sure enough, Matt and Grady replied, "No, the rocks were not from them." The Xanue apparently liked the flowers that I was planting. The success of the night sit with our open house had gotten Matt thinking. When he first brought up the idea of hosting events at our house, having people stay a few nights, sleep out, and learn how to interact with his Xanue, every introverted cell of my body shuddered. I have never been comfortable in large groups of people. However, I have come a long way out of my shy shell during the time I've been with Matt, and I was able to push aside my initial reaction. I was still absolutely terrified, but agreed that the conference setting didn't give us the opportunity to help people fully experience and understand the impact of interacting with the Xanue. I learned a lot about what could be improved with the mechanics of hosting the Camp Xanue weekend events that first summer, but those were not the important lessons. The important lessons were the ones I learned from the people who came to visit and became our friends. Watching the connections that people made during their time at our home, listening to their experiences and the impacts on their lives was awe-inspiring. In 2 to 3 days, groups of strangers were coming together and forging bonds that remained long after they left. Some people experienced physical healing. Other people experienced a profound personal interaction that touched their hearts. A few people experienced nothing, but when they returned home, interactions in their areas began. Matt and I both felt confident that we had found our path forward and our way of sharing the connection with the Xanue. Zorth had told Matt that when we found our new house, he would have a family waiting there for us. Kantu, the local clan leader, his wife, Saria, and their children, Gutha, Murta, and Botri, made their presence known immediately. And over time, we became familiar with the personalities of the children. Botri is fascinated by electronics and mechanical devices. He has turned on the wipers in my car, plays music on Matt's MP3 player, and is intrigued by the riding lawnmower. Murta loves the animals, the cats in particular. The second summer we were at the house, we received a wonderful surprise. Seska and his little sister Nipkia, a.k.a. Chatty Cathy, were visiting from Soha. Seska requested that Matt play Baker Street his first night there, always his favorite song. As we started sensing more Xanue in the house during the evenings, and the level of interaction increased during our events, Zorth confirmed to Matt that 7 additional families had moved into the area in order to be part of the events and reaching back to the people who were reaching out to them. Even Zorth has become a regular, easily identifiable by his height and impact of his energy. The Xanue were definitely reinforcing our choice to host the events on the property, and the impact on the people attending was growing. My previous commute home ended in the South Hill area of Puyallup. Congestion and traffic kept my nerves on edge until the final turn into the subdivision. The Chahala's house lies 15 miles west of town on a hilltop in the middle of farming country. The long winding road leading to the foot of the hill winds through a pastoral valley, peaceful and beautiful in every season. When I drive home on a clear night, I can see the stars from the inside of my car. There is so little light pollution, and the stars stand out vividly, even with the headlights on. I arrived to our new home in a very different mental state than I used to in Puyallup. I have had two very unusual events occur along the country road driving home. The first event occurred not long after we had moved in. It was still daylight as I was driving home. From the right-hand side of the road, I saw a reddish-orange ball rolling out of a yard into the road. As I got closer, I realized that there was no one in the yard. Also, I noticed that there was something peculiar about the color and texture of the ball, and it appeared to be floating above the ground rather than rolling on the ground. I slowed down, and the ball appeared to pass under my car. I felt a jolt as if it had hit the inside of the driver's side front wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see a collapsed ball or some kind of debris in the road. There was nothing. When I got home, I checked to see if there was anything lodged under the car, but there was no evidence of a rubber ball or any trace of what hit the wheel. The second strange event occurred in January of 2020. We had a few days of freezing weather and some periodic snow squalls. The temperature was up and down, and fronts were passing through on a daily basis. My sinuses were complaining about the constant changes in pressure. One night, a wind squall hit as I was driving home. The trees were lashing and debris was blowing across the road. Heading into the first curve on the country road, I slowed down as my car was buffeted by the wind. As I came around a bend in the road at milepost 5, I had to hit my brakes. Ahead of me, about 20 feet in the air, was a blindingly bright white-blue light. I expected to hear the explosion of a transformer, but it was quiet. Bluish-green sparks began to shoot upwards from the light. I crept forward slowly, keeping my foot on the brake just in case the anticipated explosion finally occurred. When nothing happened, I began to wonder if someone was setting off fireworks. The light faded away. I moved into the lane of oncoming traffic to maintain space between myself and the location of the light. I could see nothing but a white fence marking the driveway of a house. All their lights were on, as were the lights of the houses around them. If a transformer had been damaged in the wind, the power to the houses would be cut and there would be no lights. I maintained a slow speed moving forward, worried there could be more fireworks or possibly a broken power line. Around the next corner, I spotted a tree across the road. It appeared that I was not going any further. As I got closer, I realized the tree was in small pieces scattered across the road. It was a frozen cottonwood that had sheared off in the wind, shattering when it hit the pavement. I picked my way through the debris, driving forward cautiously. A few corners later, I encountered the final surprise of the night. I drove from wet pavement into packed snow and ice, swirling snowflakes replacing the earlier rain. 2 days later, I drove by the house where I saw the brilliant explosion of light. There was no sign of heat damage, and there were no transformers or power poles on the right side of the road. They were all on the left side of the road. That blinding light caused me to slow down and drive even more cautiously that night, just before encountering the tree debris and snow and ice coming around the corner. The Xanue had warned Matt about potential dangers facing him while driving. I believe that the Xanue were trying to get my attention that night in order to get me to slow down because of the debris on the road as well as the snow and ice. On January 1st, 2020, during our wedding vows, Matt and I both acknowledged the rabbit hole that has become so much a part of our lives together. Curiouser and curiouser is a common response for us as we move along a path that neither of us ever anticipated in our lives. I wouldn't ever want for our lives to shrink back to its previous dimensions. This path has led me to so many extraordinary people and life-changing experiences. We would love for all of you who can to join us for one of our summer weekend events and interact with the families on our property. If you are unable to make the trip, please remember that if kind people with good hearts and open minds reach out to the Xanue will reach back to them. Then you can join us in the rabbit hole from wherever you may live. So the journey continues, and whatever comes next, we will keep you posted. Part 1, the Xanue. Chapter 1, in the beginning. This is nice and short, so hang in there with me. What I'm about to share with you has come from Zorth via MindSpeak, i.e. telepathic communication. MindSpeak, telepathy, Zorth? If you're asking yourself these questions, then that means you haven't read my first book in this 4-volume series, Bigfoot, A 50-Year Journey Come Full Circle. May I strongly suggest that you put this book down, go online, and order my first Bigfoot book from Xanue.com. Once you read my first Bigfoot book and catch yourself up to speed, then please come back to this book so you can learn a whole lot more about the Xanue and how to befriend the Bigfoot forest people. By the way, my words here, not Matt's. You can also go to the videos that we did for the first book. If you have any questions, just go to Willie Rose Bigfoot. You'll find them all right there. Now back to Matt. Wait a second, what are you doing? If you haven't read my first Bigfoot book, I just asked you to put this book down, go online, order my first Bigfoot book, and read it from the front cover to the back cover. I understand that you may be sequentially impaired. I understand that you may have a contrary personality and feel compelled to do the exact opposite of what others suggest that you do. Hopefully, you'll eventually work through your possible anti-authority issues. In the meantime, please do exactly what I have suggested. Read my first Bigfoot book, so this book will make much more sense to you. If you read my Bigfoot books out of order, you're simply not going to get it. You won't understand half of what I'm sharing with you. Therefore, be a good reader. Step back from this book and go read my first Bigfoot book. I'll see you back here after you have completed your very necessary assignment in the proper order. Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. A little Star Trek there. What I'm about to share with you is not a religion. This is not a cult, and I am not a cult leader. I have asked no one for their money and earthly possessions. I am simply the messenger. I'm committed to sharing the truth. The Xanue do not claim to be demigods. Rather, they view themselves as being fellow children of God. They claim to be our brothers and sisters because all sentient beings have been created by God. Therefore, we are all children of God. The Xanue have no desire to be worshipped. Instead, just like us, they worship the Creator. They live and walk by faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. They take great offense to anyone who implies otherwise about them, like demons, Nephilim, etc. The Xanue are not monsters or demons. They are a people of faith. Unlike the human race, they never fell from grace. They are connected with God, with one another, and with the earth. What one Xanue knows, they all know. What one Xanue feels, they all feel. They are all individuals, yet they're also one corporate bodies. See 1 Corinthians 12:12 through 31. On the other hand, because of humanity's fall from grace, we are disconnected from God, from one another, and from earth. That's why humans hate, slander, envy, steal, lie, rape, murder, troll, and go to war with one another. For this reason, the Xanue keep their distance from the human race. For the record, humans are not the apex species on the planet. Although the Xanue occasionally reach out to us in an attempt to help us, in many cases they withdraw their attempts because many humans are not very kind to one another. But wait, don't give up hope. There's so much more to this story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The opening sentence of the Old Testament clearly states that God is the creator of all things. He's not only the creator of the earth, but he is also the creator of the heavens, too. The heavens are comprised of everything else out there, including the countless number of stars, planets, and other sentient life forms. In the book of Colossians, which is found in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul wrote, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. In a nutshell, no matter how you choose to view it, evolution or creationism, God spoke all life into existence. Life can only spring forth from life. Life does not spring forth from non-life. God created all things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. It doesn't matter if it took 6 days or 6 billion years to create it all. The fact of the matter is that God created it all, and Jesus holds all things together, i.e. the God particle. Most important of all, the Xanue know this to be true, and they want me to share this information with you. Before you get all upset and accuse me of interjecting my Christian faith into the subject of the Xanue, I would like to point out to you 2 very important things for your thoughtful consideration. 1, right now you're doing the same exact thing that you're accusing me of doing. You don't believe in God or Jesus Christ and therefore are interjecting your lack of Christian faith into the subject matter. For you, the explanation has to be free of God and Jesus Christ. It has to be any other possible explanation that does not include God and Jesus Christ into the discussion. Believe it or not, you have your own biases. You'll keep an open mind regarding any other possible explanation except for the inclusion of God and Jesus Christ. You'll entertain the possibility of alien manipulation of DNA or a military experiment gone awry, or that the Xanue might be the Nephilim or demons. The last 2 theoretical possibilities, I might add, most definitely require the existence of God and his creation. However, you open-mindedly accept the created sentient beings without being willing to accept the existence of the Creator. Go figure. The fun and all of the possibilities don't end there. Nope. You might possibly be contrary in nature. If you were raised Democrat, you chose to be a Republican. Perhaps you were raised Republican and chose to become a Democrat, just despite your parents. You may have been raised Christian, but chose to become Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, or an atheist, just despite your parents or your community. Finally, for example, you may have been raised in a North American Native community and refused to open-mindedly accept the existence of God and Jesus Christ. Rather, you are sticking to the beliefs that you were raised with regarding the Xanue that have absolutely nothing to do with the Trinity. Regardless of your personal reasons and unresolved struggles, you're doing the very same thing that you're accusing me of doing. You're interjecting your life experiences and beliefs into the subject of the Xanue. You're guilty of the very same bias that you just accused me of engaging in. In reality, you don't have an open mind at all. Matter of fact, your heart and mind are closed to the possibility of God and Jesus Christ being involved because of your unresolved issues from your childhood, i.e., my parents made me go to church and I didn't like it, or my parents were hypocrites, or Christianity is the white man's faith, even though Jesus wasn't white. Rather, Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew. You may have had a negative experience with the church as an adult, like I did. I saw 3 different churches within a 2-year period of time lynch their pastors for political reasons, not scriptural reasons. It was horrible to witness how ugly some alleged Christians could become, i.e., lying, gossip, slander, malice, etc. Finally, the nail in the coffin for me was when I divorced my first wife after 22 years of marriage. Not one member of our church bothered to talk with me or my parents about our side of the story. We all lived with her and witnessed her repeated actions. The church members simply swallowed my ex-wife's side of the story as the gospel truth without any verification. They kicked me to the curb over a dump truck load of lies and false allegations. My parents and I knew the truth. This was the final straw and left a very bad taste in my mouth regarding the church. I could no longer trust those in positions of leadership in the local church. They were not seekers of the truth. Rather, they were enablers of gossip, slander, and lies and dysfunctional behaviors. This leads me to my second point that I want to make regarding your allegations that I'm interjecting my Christian faith into the subject of the Xanue. Number 2, you're 100% wrong, and here's why. In light of what I just disclosed above, I was not a big fan of God, Jesus Christ, and the church. I was angry with God for what he allowed to happen in my life. It seemed like I gave him my best and he gave me his worst. Please don't get me wrong. I never chucked my Christian faith. However, I also wasn't a big fan of breaking bread and fellowshipping with other Christians. As a result of my negative experience with Christians, the mountains became my church, and the logs and stumps became the pew that I sat on to engage in worship of the Creator. Because of the betrayal I experienced, I no longer trusted Christians. In my mind, most Christians were backstabbing hypocrites. They weren't interested in the truth or living the truth. They were simply politicians vying for ecclesiastical power. They weren't any different than any other group of people at work, at school, or in the baseball little league. Therefore, you're wrong. I had absolutely no motivation or desire to interject my Christian faith into the subject matter of the Xanue. Instead, the Xanue did it in spite of my issues and lack of enthusiasm and trust in the Christian community. If you have a problem with God and Jesus Christ being interjected into the Xanue phenomenon, then you have your argument with the Xanue, not me. I'm merely the messenger. The Xanue brought me back to my spiritual roots. Over a 20-year period of time, they slowly but surely reeled me back into a strong faith in God and Jesus Christ. They helped me to experience unconditional love. They taught me the importance of letting go of my hurt and subsequent anger. They encouraged me to forgive my enemies and sometimes buy them lunch. Finally, they patiently steered me back on course regarding walking the talk of my Christian faith by focusing on things above rather than on the world below. They helped me to set my mind on the Spirit rather than on the sinful nature of the flesh. None of the above had anything to do with my upbringing whatsoever. Instead, it had everything to do with what the Xanue actually know to be true. They know that God is the Creator and that all things were created, visible and invisible, by Him and for Him and through Him. They know that Jesus Christ holds all things together, i.e., the God particle. The Xanue simply speak the truth, and they expect me to do likewise. I'm not interjecting my Christian faith into the subject of the Xanue. Rather, they are interjecting God and Jesus Christ into the Bigfoot phenomenon because the truth matters to them. They believe that it is important for humanity to know and live the truth. They want to help us reconnect with God, our neighbor, and to be good stewards of the earth. We have much to learn from them. Therefore, please stop attempting to interject your life experiences and your beliefs, or lack thereof, into the Xanue phenomena. Instead, simply let go of your preconceptions. Kick back and relax. Open up your mind to the truth, because the Xanue are going to take you for a revelatory ride on an informational highway and straight down the rabbit hole to a world that most of you never knew existed. Buckle up. Here we go. That's the end of Chapter 1 of The Xanue, Befriending the Bigfoot Forest People, written by psychologist Dr. Matthew A. Johnson. Next chapter is called The Garden of Eden. We'll see you then. I'm Willie Rose.